Okay, this next recording is continuing to look at the background of Revelation, in particular the use of numbers and the structure. I've already mentioned how apocalyptic literature has this characteristic of its use of numbers, of how numbers have a symbolic meaning as well as how many there are. This is difficult for many to grasp because for us, especially in a Greek worldview, for us, numbers just mean how many there are. Numbers don't have meanings. 12 of something means that there are 12 of them, and that's it. But this isn't necessarily so in Jewish writings, and actually in ancient writings as a whole. Particularly for Jewish, this is the weird and wonderful world of gematria, which is the Jewish symbolic understanding of numbers. This is about how certain numbers mean certain things, and certain words have numerical values. Now, this may appear strange to us, but the reason it appears strange to us is because we have two distinct symbols when it comes to the alphabet and when it comes to numbers. We have an alphabet and we have a numbering system. In the ancient world, they didn't have that. In the ancient world, they had no numbering system. Their numbering system and their alphabet was the same. So Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, the rest, they had no numbers. Letters were used in the place of numbers. The most common example of this, the easiest to understand, is Latin. We all know this because this is still used today, how Roman numerals are used instead of numbers in many cases. How I equals 1, V equals 5, X equals 10, and so on. So if you wander around an old city like London, on buildings, on monuments, instead of 1846 written, you will see MDCCC XLVI because it looks a lot more impressive than writing in our numerals. Well, the same was true for Greek, Aramaic, and Hebrew. And this is where gematria comes in. Because certain words had numerical values, so Jews began to look for numbers in writing that wasn't set out to mean numbers. So, for example, the Torah was studied to find out how much certain laws or words added up to. As an example, using Latin and English again, if you take the English word mix, means to mix things up, but in Latin, it also means 1009. So this one word has a meaning and a value. So this is true in Hebrew as well. Words had a meaning and a value. And so, if you like, the distinction between them blurred. And numbers themselves started to have meaning as well. The clearest example of how this is used, and how the Bible uses this too, to convey an extra meaning, is in the beginning of Matthew. You look at the genealogy of Christ in the beginning of Matthew. It says that there are 14 generations from Abraham to David. So you have Abraham, David, the exile, and Jesus. And Matthew says that there were 14 generations between Abraham and David, 14 between the exile, David and the exile, and 14 between the exile and Jesus. Except there wasn't. And if you compare Matthew's genealogies to the other genealogies in the Old Testament, like Chronicles, for example, you'll see that Matthew dropped quite a few names from this list. In other words, he adapted Jesus' family tree to get the number 14 repeated 3 times. Now for us, we would start saying, hang on, Matthew, you can't do that. You can alter facts, especially in the Bible. But if he didn't think of that, he was actually trying to give a message. Not about how many wasn't important. It was the message that he was trying to say. So why? Why 14? Well, if you translate Hebrew into English, a way to get 14 is 4 plus 6 plus 4. Well, the Hebrew letter for 4 is the English D. The Hebrew word for 6, letter for 6, is V. And then D again. And so basically, 14 is the numerical value of David. Because the A and the I is a point system, so it isn't an actual letter. So that's 4, that's 6, that's 4. So David equals 14. So for Jews, the number 14 has this close association with David, their great king. So what Matthew is doing in the genealogy is changing Jesus' genealogy to read David, David, David. So a Jew reading the book of Matthew, even before he starts hearing about Jesus, the author is telling him this person is connected to David. In fact, David repeated 3 times, and 3 is the divine number. So Matthew is essentially saying, this is Jesus, this is the Son of David, this is the Son of God, just by using numbers. So that's an example of how the Bible authors use numbers to their Jewish audience to explain, to give more than just numbers. Numbers mean more than just numbers to the Jews and to the early church. And this is throughout the scripture. So for example, if you look at Jesus' disciples, yes, Jesus had 12 disciples. There were 12 of them. But there was a reason that there was 12. Jesus chose 12 for a specific reason, because it had a message to the people he was speaking to. So let's look at some of these significant numbers that you get in Revelation and how they were seen in this understanding. 1 is the number of unity or uniqueness. So Yahweh is 1. He is unique and complete in himself. Also, you get the idea of marriage. 2 become 1. They become united. So when you see 1, it's about unity or uniqueness. 2 is the number of companionship or added strength. 2 are stronger than 1. 2 people doing the same thing, making it more and stronger. But it's also connected to witness and to the law. Because in the law, in order for somebody to be found guilty, you'd have to have at least 2 witnesses to the crime, not 1. So there's a connection in Jewish understanding between 2 and witnesses. 3 was always seen as the divine number, the number that represented God. 4, on the other hand, is everything else. It's creation. 4 is the number of creation. The 4 winds, the cherubim with the 4 faces. All of these represented all of creation in some way. 6 was the sinister number for the Jews, the number of evil or fallenness. This is probably because of the next number, which is 7. Because 7 was seen as the number of completion or perfection. So 6 is falling short of completion. So it had this idea of fallenness, of evil. So 7, there's maybe two possible reasons why 7 was completion. It might be going back to the Genesis story, saying how God created everything in 7 days, so it's complete. Or it could be a numerical thing, the fact that if 3 is the divine number and 4 is the number of creation, then God plus creation is everything. 10 was seen as the human number. perhaps because of 10 fingers. Work, how humans work with their hands, this connection with human. It could also represent human power or human government. 12 was the covenant number, the religious number. You had the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 disciples of Jesus, and so on. It was always a number that represented the covenant between Yahweh and his people. Again, this could be because of the 12 tribes of Israel, or it could be a numerical thing, because, again, God is 3, creation is 4, the covenant, the relationship between God and creation, 3 times 4, perhaps. Combinations of these numbers, or divisions of these numbers, are also significant. 3.5 was significant, because it's directly half of 7. There was this Jewish idea that just like the whole world was created in 7 days, there would be 7 days or 7 periods of creation throughout history. And the Messiah would come in the middle, so 3.5, halfway through history. So 3.5 can then sometimes be this yearning for completion, halfway through completion, halfway through the story. Or it could be a sense of judgment, when God breaks in the middle of history through the Messiah. Also, many significant events in Jewish history happen over 3.5 years, such as the abomination of Antiochus Epiphanes IV, the ministry of Jesus, the drought that Elijah calls, the Roman siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. All of these took place over roughly 3.5 year period. 1,000 is often significant, maybe because it's 10 times 10 times 10. So humanity or human government made divine, or godly government, or godly humanity. Or it could be simply used to signify a long period of time. 12,000 because it's 12 times 10 times 10 times 10. So religion times divine human government. The idea of perfect humanity in relationship with God. Connected to this is 144,000, which is 12,000 times 12,000. So it's the same idea of 12,000, but in added witness or added companionship, connected to witness or testimony in some way. So that's numbers. I also briefly want to talk about the structure of Revelation. The big question about the structure is the chronology. Is the sequence of visions we have in this letter in a chronological order? Did John record them in the way that they will happen in time, or did he simply record them in the order that he saw them, and they're not necessarily chronological? The reason this is questioned is because there does seem to be parallel sections within the book. Parts of the book seems to cover the same ground as previous parts. For example, you have at least 3 last battles in Revelation. Babylon is mentioned a number of times. And the trumpets and the bowl kind of mirror each other. So is Revelation talking about the same things over and again, using different images? And if so, how many times does it do this? It's common amongst the futurist view to see 2 large parallel sections in the book. They would say that chapters 4 to 11 is a description of tribulation from the perspective of heaven. Then chapter 12 to 19 is a description of the tribulation from the perspective of earth. So if you like, each of these chapters are happening at the same time. Four to 11, heaven, and 12 to 19 on earth. So it's happening at the same time. Some idealists will actually see 7 parallel sections within this book. And each of these, they would say, describes the church age, but using different images. 1 to 3, the 7 letters applied to the church all ages. The seals symbolically describing the same period. The trumpets, the church age is shown between the war between the dragon and the women's children in 12 to 14. The 7 bowl symbols in 15 to 16. The rider's victory over Babylon in 17 to 19. And the final victory in eternity. And some would also say there's actually a reference to the second coming in each section. Some would also see Revelation as a drama, as a dramatic book. And essentially there being 2 acts, if you like, with 7 scenes each going throughout the book. Some people also question the fact that there are 3 battles in this book, like I mentioned, in 16, 14, 19, 19, and 28. Are they the same battle? Or are they different ones? The order of some of the things that happens is strange. For example, the beast rises to power in 13:1, but he's in chapter 11 persecuting the 2 witnesses. Babylon falls in 14:8, but it's still around in 17 and 18. And then you have the judgments, the seals, the trumpets, the bowls. What is their relationship to each other? Some see them as some kind of progression, as they follow on from each other, each becoming more intense. So the 7 seals are the preparation of judgment. The 7 trumpets are a partial judgment, because only a third of things are judged. And then the 7 bowls will be the permanent judgment, where all are judged. Others see them as a progression, but as slightly different, like a telescopic progression. The idea being is you have 7 seals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But the 7th seal is the 7 trumpets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then the 7th trumpet is the 7 bowls. So if you like, the 7th seal opens up, and within the 7th seal are all of the 7 trumpets. And within the 7th trumpet are all of the 7 bowls. So they're like a telescopic idea. Though some would say they would focus more on the trumpets and the bowls being identical, being talking about the same thing, using different language. This is because each of them actually affects the same thing. The first trumpet and the first bowl affects the earth, the second the sea, the third the rivers, the fourth the heavenly bodies, the 5th people, the 6th Euphrates, and the 7th is the end. So there are lots of debates. Most people agree there are parallel sections in Revelation. The debate is how many and where they are. But it is an important question, because the way you think of chronology in Revelation is going to affect the way you interpret certain parts of the book. For example, if chapter 20 follows on from chapter 19 chronologically, so 19 happens first and then 20 in time, and 19 is about the second coming, and 20 is about the millennium, then if this is chronological, then that means the second coming happens before the millennium. And if that's the case, you would be, if you think that, then you're going to be a premillennialist. So your interpretation will be premillennial. But if this is talking about cycles, and that 19 is the end of the cycle, and then 20 is the beginning of a new one, then the chronology is different. Then actually, the millennium happens before the second coming. And so if you believe this about the structure, then you are going to be a post-millennial or a la millennial in your approach to chapter 20. So your chronology of the chapters force you then to accept a particular viewpoint on a part of the book. And this is true when it comes to all of Revelation. It's like the way you think of the whole book is going to affect the way you look at the details. Which is why these views are so important, which is why I want you to know as much about them so you can make an informed decision. Lastly, I want to talk about two possible chiastic structures to Revelation. I always wondered whether Revelation was a chiasm. And a couple of years ago I looked through it and I thought I found one. And then, whilst looking through another book, I found another one. So I was quite happy that I wasn't mad and somebody else thought it might be a chiasm. And so these are the two that I found. The first one myself and the second one in a book, which will be on the PowerPoint where it's from. In this first one, you have the bride of the Lamb, the 7 churches. So the beginning of the book is looking at the church as represented by the 7 churches. But the end of the book also looks at the bride of the Lamb, but in that sense, it's the New Jerusalem. Then you have the authority of the Lamb. So the Lamb in the heavenly court has the authority to act out all of these judgments that will come. And then mirroring that, you have the victory of the Lamb. So he begins with the authority and ends with the victory. He has the authority to do it, and then he has done it. In the 7 seals, the city is attacked. But then in Babylon, the city falls. In the 7 trumpets and the 7 bowls, like I said, they are a mirror, and they're both talking about the judgment upon the wicked. And then right in the middle, in this chiasm, would be the story of the 7 signs, the story of the woman, the child, the dragon, and the beasts. So really, the central point of the book, in this way of looking at it, is this idea of who do you worship? Do you worship the Lamb or the beast? Because that's the question of the 7 signs. So in this way of looking at Revelation, the whole point of the book is who do you worship? Do you worship the Lamb? Do you worship Jesus? Or do you worship the beast, whoever the beast is? Another possible one is fascinating. You have this idea of a prologue and a greeting at the beginning, and then a closing and an epilogue mirroring it out. And again, you have the 7 churches and the New Jerusalem, the bride, both about the same thing. You have the 7 seals in this way mirroring the destruction of Babylon. And then you have this interesting thing, because you have 7 trumpets, angels, and 2 witnesses. But then later, you have 2 beasts, angels, and 7 bowls. And then right in the middle, you have 12, 1-7, which is the woman, the dragon, and the male child. So for this possible chiasm, the idea is that it's the story of the woman, the dragon, the male child, the idea of how the church came into existence through Jesus, establishing the church, and then the way the dragon attacked the church. So it's the center idea is like the struggle, constant struggle between the dragon attacking the church, the followers of Jesus, throughout history would be the center of the chiasm.